How well do you think you can understand spoken Spanish? Listen to this recording and see if you can tell what's being said.
Era para lo del otro día.
Okay, maybe this isn't fair because it's out of context. So don't worry about what the meaning is. Can you at least tell what the words are?
Era para lo del otro día.
If you've been studying Spanish for a while, you should recognize everything about this sentence. It's just 6 words, all of them extremely common, everyday words that you use in every conversation. So as one last try, see if you can accurately write them down before I reveal the answer.
Era para lo del otro día.
Okay, let's see how you did. Here's the answer.
Era para lo del otro día.
Of course, now that you see it written down, it's really easy to identify the words. But unfortunately, most Spanish learners have trouble identifying the Spanish that they hear even after studying Spanish grammar for years. Don't worry, there is a solution. In fact, there's a step-by-step method for working your way up to flawlessly comprehending the Spanish that you hear. And I'll describe the method in a minute, but first, before you get really angry about how hard Spanish is to understand, let me show you how Spanish is really no harder than English in this regard. If you had trouble understanding that sentence, the main reason is that it actually doesn't sound the way it's spelled. This happens in English too. So listen as I pronounce an English sentence the way that I might pronounce it in real life in a casual conversation. See if you can tell what I'm saying. I wasn't so sure about it. So, were you able to understand that? Now here it is with the text showing. I wasn't so sure about it. If you're a native English speaker, you probably had almost no trouble understanding what I said. But if English is not your native language, it's a different story. If you look closely at this sentence, it should have 3 T's in it. But do you ever actually hear a T sound when I say the sentence? I wasn't so sure about it. So maybe the English textbooks say that the letter T is supposed to be pronounced as T. But in real life, it often doesn't sound that way. So how are people who are learning English supposed to understand us at all? Well, I have some bad news and I have some good news. The bad news is that Spanish is similar. When it's spoken in real life, it doesn't sound as clear and precise as your Spanish courses make it out to be. There are actually many sounds that tend to change from what they're theoretically supposed to be. But the good news is that Spanish is a much more phonetic language than English, which means that it does have stricter rules. And even when the rules are broken, they follow certain predictable patterns, certain tendencies that you can actually learn to expect. Let's demonstrate with the Spanish sentence from the beginning of this video. You're about to hear it, and when you do, try to focus on just one thing. How many times do you hear the letter D?
Era para lo del otro día.
Okay, now I'll display the sentence.
Era para lo del otro día.
Why is it that the letter D was so difficult to hear in this sentence? We would have expected lo del otro día. But in the recording, the D almost disappears. Well, this is actually something that you can learn to expect and to work around in your comprehension of Spanish. I'll break down how step by step. First of all, let's take a close look at how the letter D is formed in Spanish. It's actually pretty different from the English D. In English, we put the tongue against the roof of the mouth, D. In Spanish, the tongue is against the teeth, the. It sounds kind of like the th sound in they, the. Now, that's only the textbook, theoretically correct way to pronounce the letter D. In real life, there are times when it sounds different and almost disappears, particularly when it occurs right after a vowel. So compare the way it sounds when I pronounce these 2 phrases. El día. Otro día. So in the first case, it sounded correct and normal, día. But in the second case, the D was softened. My tongue went close to my upper teeth, but it didn't really press against them fully. So the D sounds much softer. So listen to these again. El día. Otro día. In the second case, the D sounded almost like the letter L. But for fun, try it yourself. Practice saying otro día as kind of a lazy D, not fully pronounced. Otro día. Once you get a feel for this, it makes sense. Okay, so now let's try it with a longer phrase that has two lazy letter Ds in it. Lo del otro día. Practice imitating exactly what you hear. Lo del otro día. Okay, now it's time to go back to that recorded sentence that we heard earlier. See if this time you can hear the Ds.
Era para lo del otro día.
How did it feel to listen to that? Probably quite a bit different from how it felt at the beginning of this video. So now that you've said the letter D like this a few times, kind of lazily, it's also much easier to hear it. When you hear this recording, you can now connect with it much better, almost as if you can feel it in your mouth.
Era para lo del otro día.
Okay, so that was fun, but let's take a step back for a second. You've now learned something, so maybe with some practice you'll be able to understand the lazy letter D when you hear it going forward. But what about every other aspect of the Spanish language? How long will it take until you can understand every sound that you hear accurately, including all the ways that Spanish pronunciation kind of breaks the rules? Well, not too long. So, here's the step-by-step process for understanding all the Spanish that you hear. Step 1 is to master understanding the core sounds of Spanish when you hear them. Step 2 is to master understanding those sounds combined into Spanish words. Step 3 is to master hearing Spanish phrases, which is words combined with each other. And then the final step, step 4, is to learn the specific ways that the phonetic rules of Spanish can be broken. And it's really that simple. It happens in 4 steps. Of course, at each step, you'll want to get lots of listening practice as well. But this is a step-by-step process that will keep you from being overwhelmed. That's because, let's say you're following this process and you hear some Spanish that you can't understand. Just remind yourself that it's okay. You're currently where you are in the 4 steps. You'll get to the next level very soon if you focus on the level you're on. So let's dive in and talk about each of these levels in a little more detail. Step 1 is to master understanding the core sounds of Spanish when you hear them. This means diving into the Spanish alphabet a bit, learning all the mechanics of both vowels and consonants in Spanish, with every detail. The goal is that when you hear Spanish being spoken clearly, you can reliably tell what sounds you're hearing on an individual level. So this is super granular. You're not hearing entire words, but it's a great starting point. Once you've mastered this level, if you hear any Spanish vowel or consonant out of context, you'll know exactly what you're hearing. Step 2 is to master understanding Spanish words when you hear them. At this stage, the goal isn't just to understand individual Spanish letters, it's to understand an entire word, specifically when you hear it spoken clearly. With practice, you'll be able to write down any Spanish word you hear without a problem. You'll even be able to do this if you hear a word you've never heard before, maybe something long and obscure like desvinculado. Once you've mastered this level, you can hear any Spanish word and understand it as clearly as if you had seen it written out on a page. This is a super exciting place to be in your Spanish listening skills. Step 3 is to master understanding Spanish phrases when you hear them. So this is where the rubber meets the road, and it's difficult, but doable. If you've mastered step 2, it's now time to practice hearing multiple words strung together and to become really closely acquainted with Spanish phrasing, including the specific ways that words blend together. The fact is, when Spanish is spoken in phrases rather than individual words, there are some specific, predictable rules for how they blend together. You can actually get really good at hearing entire phrases step by step, and getting to the point that you're understanding the Spanish you hear as clearly as if you were reading it. Once you master this level, you'll be able to understand the Spanish that you hear in conversations in real time better than ever. Step 4 is the final step, and that's to learn the specific ways that the phonetic rules of Spanish can be broken. This is advanced, and it's how you approach a native level of understanding in Spanish, knowing not only how the letter D gets modified when Spanish is spoken in real life, but all the rules for how Spanish rules are broken in real life, especially when Spanish is spoken really fast. This level takes a lot of time to master, but once you do, you'll be able to get a grasp on absolutely anything you hear in Spanish. And now comes the best news of all. You don't have to do all this work on your own. We've created a 4-part course to help you master all 4 of these levels one at a time. So we joined forces with Tamara Matov, an expert in Spanish phonetics, to make sure that we're covering absolutely everything we can to get you from each level to the next, with no gaps in your knowledge. In addition to the curriculum, you'll get access to a vault of listening materials to put all of this into practice at your own level at every step. And we'll be adding more and more materials all the time, including recordings of native spoken Spanish of various levels from beginner to advanced. After joining, you'll have lifetime access to the entire course. So if it takes you only a week to get from level 1 to level 2, but then you get delayed and have to work on other things, you can come back to the course anytime you want, even years from now, and enjoy the lessons and all the practice materials. Use the link in the description of this video to join the course once it goes live, or to join the waitlist if the doors aren't open yet. I'm beyond excited that we're now able to share this course with the world, and I can't wait to see how your Spanish listening skills are transformed by this method.